Hi, I'm Chuck Gifford, and I'll be reading you selections from this week's, March the 5th, Nantucket Inquirer Mirror. Our first story today comes from the top of the front page and is headlined, Sconset Civic Association Looking to Limit Bluff Walk Use, by Dean Geddes, March 2nd. The Sconset Civic Association was scheduled to ask the Select Board yesterday to consider restrictions on the Sconset Bluff Walk, saying foot traffic on the popular path with unparalleled views of the Atlantic Ocean has become unacceptable in recent years. The meeting was after press time. Please check act.net for updates. But its proposal raises an immediate question. What authority does the town have to regulate a public way whose use has been legally protected for more than a century? One of the most significant parts of the Civic Association proposed management plan is a request to restrict access during July and August to 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. In written comments, town administration has already advised the Select Board it has no legal authority to limit the hours of a public way, and that any restriction would be advisory only. Homeowners along the bluff have previously told the Inquirer Mirror that summer foot traffic, once measured at roughly 23 people per hour in 2010, often exceeds 100 per hour and sometimes reaches 200. The proposal also calls for installing wooden turnstiles at the north and south entrances, hiring seasonal bluff rangers to educate visitors, expanding erosion monitoring, removing promotional references from town messaging, and installing clearer signs to direct foot traffic away from Front Street. In comments included in the board's meeting packet, town administration also raised concerns about the lack of enforcement authority for privately funded rangers and the potential for increased conflict between visitors and abutters. Other elements of the plan, including erosion monitoring and less public advertising, received support. The push for restrictions comes after years of increasing complaints from homeowners along the roughly 1 mile path. In 2023, the Inquirer Mirror spoke with residents who said that the summer use of the Bluff Walk had reached unsustainable levels. "We're just getting overwhelmed on the Bluff Walk," Baxter Road resident Andrew Saul said at the time. "Ever since COVID, the foot traffic has gone bananas." The narrow footpath runs directly along the property lines of multi-million-dollar waterfront homes. Saul said that tourist buses arrive in Sconset and unload passengers who head straight for the bluff. "If you go into my backyard, you'll see people with yoga mats, and I'm not exaggerating, bicycles, dogs," he said. "And as the buses come into Sconset, the people get off and just inundate our backyard." Steve Colon, a Baxter Road resident, said at the time that visitors had begun leaving the path and entering private property. It seems like in the last year, the number of people who have violated our property and left the Bluff Walk to enter our property has significantly increased, he said. "It's a nonstop parade these days." Susan Whitney, another Baxter Road homeowner, said in 2023 the issue was less about privacy and more about erosion. She said the path had sunk several inches over the previous 7 years, and informal counts that once averaged roughly 23 people per hour have reached 4 to 8 times that amount in the summer. The footpath was deeded in 1892 by developer William Flagg, who embedded a public easement into the lots he sold along Baxter Road. In 1930, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court affirmed that the, quote, "path along the bluff," end quote, is held in trust, quote, "for the purpose of a way or footpath along the bank and for no other purposes," end quote, and must be maintained for foot passengers and for the use and enjoyment of the public at large. Now, nearly 100 years later, the Select Board is being asked to determine whether it can, or even wants to, regulate the use of a path that the law has ruled is open to the public. Our next story from the front page is headlined, Blizzard Tests Town Emergency Response by Dean Geddes, March 3rd. Last week's blizzard of 2026 toppled 25 trees, triggered roughly 50 downed wire calls, and saw the Nantucket Fire Department respond to 75 calls for service in a single 24-hour stretch, more than 7 times its typical winter volume. On a typical winter day, we probably respond to 10 calls, Fire Chief Michael Cranston, who also serves as Nantucket's Emergency Management Director, said. During that 24-hour period, we responded to 75 emergency calls. During the peak, nearly 86% of the island was without power, according to National Grid. Nantucket received roughly 6 to 7 inches of snow, far less than many communities on Cape Cod and across southeastern Massachusetts. But town officials said strong winds and heavy wind-driven snow were the main cause of downed trees and outages. There were routine emergency medical calls, but firefighters also handled a number of pole fires and brush fires sparked by downed power lines, along with carbon monoxide alarms. That is something, Cranston said, rises sharply when the power goes out and people turn to alternative heating methods in their homes. The Department of Public Works, meanwhile, had to deal with widespread tree damage while working to keep the town's main roads and access ways passable. Despite the surge in activity, Cranston said that the island avoided a worst-case scenario. There were no life-threatening crises, he said, and coordination with the DPW made sure that emergency crews were able to reach calls even when roads were blocked by downed trees and wires. It was a significant test for the town manager Libby Gibson said, and I think it was a test that the town passed. DPW crews worked extended shifts, the sewer department helped with plowing, and private contractors were hired to assist. Cranston credited National Grid's rapid response for the relatively swift power restoration, although some isolated areas were without electricity for nearly 4 days, and the Steamship Authority for helping transport National Grid vehicles and workers to the island. We were at like 11,000 that were out, he said, so the fact that we're down to such a small number on Friday morning is a testament to National Grid. Gibson, who has seen a number of major storms batter the island during her tenure in town government, said that the benchmark remains the blizzard of 2015, which knocked out power, telephone, and 911 service to all of the island for nearly a day. This was perhaps a close comparison to 2015, but 2015 was, I would say, a little bit worse, she said. The storm hitting at the start of school vacation week was a double-edged sword, Cranston added. We had fewer people on the island affected, but we also had fewer resources and volunteers, he said. That meant that there was less personnel to staff the warming center that the town set up on Monday evening at the Nantucket Intermediate School, but it ended up being a moot point as only a dozen people utilized the services of the shelter. Initially, when we had the numbers approaching 12,000 properties without power, we were making plans to open a shelter and be ready to take in a lot of people, Cranston said. But I think a lot of those people getting power back quickly was a factor. Cranston said that town officials first began closely monitoring the storm Friday, when forecasts started to suggest a major storm could impact the island. As confidence increased over the weekend that it would take a major hit, department heads began meeting twice a day. The emergency team included town administration, police and fire representatives, and DPW officials who coordinated with the schools, Nantucket Cottage Hospital, and utility providers. The emergency team also took part in numerous calls with the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, or MEMA, throughout the week, Cranston said, as well as State Senator Julian Cyr and State Representative Thomas Moakley. Gibson said that the town is now conducting damage assessments on its property, with early indications that the most significant damage may be at the town pier, where floating docks reportedly separated from the pier during the height of the storm. The town is also compiling an estimate of overall storm-related costs. Gibson said it is unlikely that the damage will meet the requirement for state or federal disaster relief, though insurance may offset some losses. By the end of the week, the island had largely stabilized. It was the result, officials said, of a coordinated island-wide effort. When we have one of these storms, it's all hands on deck. Everybody steps up, Cranston said. Still on the front page, our next story is headlined, Plans Filed to Redevelop Roasted Property by Kay Quigley, February 27th. A 3-story mixed-use building has been proposed for the current location of the Roasted General Store and Coffee Shop at the intersection of Orange Street and West Creek Road, but that doesn't mean that the popular Mid-Island Java joint is going away. According to plans filed February 9th with the Planning Department, Roasted would not close as a result of the project if it is approved. The application outlines a plan to lift the current Roasted store off its footprint and move it onto a neighboring lot under common ownership at 1 West Creek Road. That property, as well as the 159 Orange Street property that the Roasted store sits on, are owned by a limited partnership, 159 Orange Street LP, of which Todd Bowling, CEO of Island Energy Services, is the resident agent. The property, quote, has similar ownership to those that are involved in IES, end quote, Bowling said on Monday. Coffee, baked goods, and sandwiches would continue to be served out of the same Roasted storefront, just in a slightly different spot, while the mixed-use structure, containing 6 apartments, office space, and a new retail space for Roasted, is constructed. The store will close briefly while the current building is being moved, Bowling said, but, quote, not more than 10 days, I would think, probably faster than that, at a time frame when there's not a whole lot of people here, which I think is news to everybody that everybody wants to hear, end quote. Roasted has also expanded into other island stores the last several years, with kiosks at Airport Gas and the Mid-Island Stop and Shop and Bartlett's Ocean View Farm. Upon completion of the new Orange Street building, Roasted will move its operation into the retail space on the first floor, and the current building would stay where it was, moved, and become office space. A large portion of the housing proposed on the upper floors will be available for year-round housing, whether it's employees or other similar kinds of year-round people on Nantucket, Bowling said. He's not sure if there'll be an affordability component to the housing, but he is sure that it's being considered, he said. The office spaces are not yet slated for anyone in particular, he added. It's really designed to be a balance between the retail footprint that we think makes sense for the area, as well as residential or potentially office space. And so we're going to meet with the planning board to work that out and make sure that everyone's on the same page, that we agree that that's a good plan, Bowling said. The mixed-use building's footprint would be approximately 2,357 square feet, about 4 times the ground cover of the current Roasted store at 596 square feet. It is also proposed to be 34 feet tall. A waiver is being sought to exceed the neighborhood's building height cap of 30 feet. The structure would also include a basement. A waiver of parking requirements is also being sought, with the applicants hoping to offer 21 spaces instead of the required 27. A small building on the 1 West Creek Road property, currently used as the office space for the Nantucket Architectural Group, or NAG, but also approved as an apartment, would remain where it is, and its use would not change according to the application. Both properties were previously owned by Ronald Bamber, according to property records, but changed hands last summer. The .27-acre 159 Orange Street parcel was sold June 16th of 2025 for $2,700,000, and the .13-acre 1 West Creek Road property was sold August 15, 2025, for $1,600,000. The application is scheduled to be reviewed by the Planning Board March 9th. Check back for updates. Our next story is headlined Turf Wars. Board of Health weighs pros and cons of synthetic turf on island by Sarah Roberts. The Board of Health had a roundtable discussion Monday with the sole topic being the possibility of installing synthetic turf at Nantucket High School's Vito Capizio Stadium. No vote followed the discussion, which was held to give the board a chance to hear from experts on each side of the turf field safety argument before it makes a decision on whether to allow or ban the use of synthetic turf on Nantucket. At the beginning of the meeting, Superintendent of Nantucket Public Schools, Beth Hallett, gave the board a brief overview of the project thus far and reminded the board that the school would never endorse a project that is harmful to the community. I hope that today you will hear that multitudes of scientific study and evidence shows that the project as proposed, which includes synthetic turf among many other pieces, does not include any intentionally added PFAS into the system, Hallett said. Hallett told the Inquirer Mirror Wednesday the turf field is necessary to support the hours of usage by the athletic program. Our current field is grossly overused and in poor condition, even with regular resodding or reseeding yearly or even twice per year. Even if we were to install a new natural grass field right where the current grass field is, it would end up in the same condition it is now if we continue to use it in the same way we currently do, Hallett said. She also explained how disruptive the installation of a natural grass field would be to Nantucket student athletes, with the amount of time to lay the field down and allow for grass to grow. The fields would need to be untouched for up to 18 months, and she worries about the halt in sports negatively affecting students' mental health. It is very likely that we would have to limit practice, play, and competition as we just don't have any other spaces on our campus or even in the community for our students to play, she continued. After having heard multiple students give testimony about what happens when they cannot play at school committee meetings, the Board of Health meeting in December, and the Select Board meeting, it is incredibly clear to me that turf is the only real solution. I cannot make our students wait only to see them become more anxious and withdrawn. At the meeting, Hallett told the Board of Health that turf would also be more cohesive with allowing play during inclement weather in the event that it was not severe enough to cancel the games. On an island with limited acreage and 70% of students that participate in sports, school administration needs infrastructure that will maximize usage. A turf field will allow for play to happen even in the pouring rain. I would not love to do that as an athlete, but there's a better chance and more opportunity to use the field to play if it's synthetic turf, is a synthetic turf field as opposed to a natural grass field, Hallett said. The track and field program at Nantucket High School has also been rapidly growing, making synthetic track surfaces necessary, Hallett said. It's also important to note that we have recently added track and field to our athletic program, a sport that caters to students who may not want the amount of student-to-student contact as football, lacrosse, soccer, and field hockey. Currently, these students have to practice on our incredibly outdated cinder and rock track, which is nowhere near up to code, so that our track team could host a competition on the island. These student athletes deserve an adequate facility for them to practice and compete on too, she said. Hallett also touched on turf being the most cost-effective option for the school standpoint. Turf fields are fairly low maintenance, meaning that there would be a cost savings without having to resod, reseed, mow, maintain, repaint, and irrigate. We use approximately 1.7 million gallons of water per year to irrigate. As the As the toxicology experts have stated numerous times, the new developments in synthetic turf have shown that there's no intentionally added PFAS in any of the turf system. Any amount is well under the state and federal limits, and we are committed to testing that turf even before it even arrives on island for installation to show this, Hallett told the INM. Caleb Bennett, a scientist who first began calling attention to the dangers of the so-called forever chemicals, PFAS, nearly a decade ago, presented a strong argument to the board about how harmful installing a project with any trace of PFAS would be to the community. Representatives from Weston and Sampson and SMRT, the engineering groups advising the town and school system on the turf field installation, already approved by the Nantucket School Committee, were also at the meeting, along with other scientists and school administrators. During her presentation, Bennett pointed to the phrase, quote, "no intentionally added PFAS," end quote, which has been repeatedly used throughout various presentations on the project. We shouldn't care if it was intentionally added or not. If it's in the product, you shouldn't be putting it down on your sole source aquifer, she said. She also spoke about the danger of similar strains of PFAS, such as PFOS and PFOA, two different compounds that are harmful at any level, she said. We're talking about minimizing risk and not making the situation worse. And the way to minimize risk is not to add more PFAS wherever it is feasible, Bennett said. Sarah Evans, an associate professor at the Incheon School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, also presented at the meeting. Evans's presentation, however, referenced many studies on turf fields that use crumb rubber. Crumb rubber has been confirmed to be a very harmful form of infill for turf that was never brought up before any board as an option for the turf field on Nantucket. Engineers from Weston and Sampson, SMRT, and TRC companies shared with the board the testing process on the turf. It consists on putting all components of the turf through an extremely vigorous testing to see what would run off the field over the course of its lifetime. The specific batch of turf that will be installed on the island will be tested before it's shipped here, Steve LaRosa of Weston and Sampson said. Other batches of the turf that would be installed here that had been tested have consistently come back non-detected for PFAS. They also explained the drainage system that will sit underneath the turf field and in between the track and field to catch any water runoff and prevent it from seeping into the soil on the island. This is also what will be tested throughout the use of fields to ensure that they are not harmful levels of PFAS. The independent third-party scientists that we've called upon to help us with this project are incredibly knowledgeable in toxicology, particularly PFAS chemistry, risk assessment, and hydrology. Some of them have worked with the town of Nantucket on other important projects. I am fully confident that they would alert us to anything that could be harmful to the community. I feel confident that rigorous testing of the actual turf that we would be installing will show that that turf system is safe, Hallett told the INM. Hadley Dutra, a longtime Islander with kids who have participated in Whalers athletics, said that she thinks it's important for the student athletes to see local elected officials and the broader community invest in their sports and well-being. It's a big point of pride, and that's something, too, I think is important to focus on, is that the kids who live here see the wealth. They see these houses going up. They see private courts being installed for pickleball and bocce ball and basketball courts, and they're all state-of-the-art, Dutra said. But then they see their own facilities as being second class, and I think it really leaves like a mental impression on them. Part of this is having the pride that you want your kids to feel when they walk out into the stadium. Underneath the turf field, there will also be shock pads, which can absorb impact. Contrary to some opinions, it is very safe. One reason being that in the turf system there are shock pads, And when you fall, there's a lot of support, and it's less strain on your joints, and it causes less injuries from the tackle. So I think it's a better surface for football, Dutra said. She also talked about environmental benefits that a turf field would have on the community. I'm very much concerned about the environment, Dutra said. The turf fields don't require fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, or mowing. Particularly when it comes to fertilizer, nitrogen is a huge problem on Nantucket. We talk about it in reference to our waterways and the health of the harbor right now, which no one is talking about for some reason, but right now a lot of nitrogen is being put down on the playing fields because they're trying in earnest to get the grass to grow, because nitrogen is found in fertilizer. I think that's not great for the environment. There's no drainage systems under the field to capture that chemical and treat it. The renovation of the school system's outdoor athletic facilities sparked debate last September after the school committee approved a plan that consisted of an asphalt track and natural grass field. Since then, hundreds of student athletes have continued to show up to school committee meetings, voicing their opinions on why Nantucket athletes need turf. They themselves wrote a petition and gathered over 200 signatures from student athletes and other students in strong support of this project. It is their voices that we really need to listen to, Hallett said. They have done research, read articles, spoken at multiple meetings, and put the time and effort into advocating for themselves and their fellow students, and I am so incredibly proud of them. Hallett also emphasized to the INM that this project is more than just a turf field. We're building a track, a new grandstand that is ADA compliant, significantly advanced lighting that complies with Nantucket's dark skies requirements, a new booster shack with concession stand and restrooms, a new field house, and many other things. Our project designers have done painstaking work to ensure us that the materials we are using are safe for the community, she said. For months, the topic dominated public comment at school committee meetings. Several Nantucket high school students advocated for synthetic turf, while others in the community have expressed serious concerns about PFAS. The committee eventually voted to change the plan to a synthetic turf and track, sending the project to the Select Board, which placed an article appropriating funding for the project on the 2026 annual town meeting warrant. That's all I have time for. This is your reader, Chuck Gifford, saying goodbye, and thanks for listening.